You really believe retirement in America is out of reach? Most people think it's about how much you saved. It's not. It's about where you live. And getting that wrong can quietly cost you thousands every single month. The average Social Security check sits a little over $2,000, and in many cities that disappears just covering rent. Same income, different town, and suddenly that money covers a home, groceries, even a walk through places like Hot Springs National Park without stress. That gap isn't luck, it's geography. We looked at real data, real towns, real numbers, and found 10 places where the math actually works, and almost nobody is paying attention to them. Number 10. Enid, Oklahoma. What if your biggest retirement expense just stopped controlling your life? In a place like Enid, Oklahoma, that question becomes real the moment you look at the numbers. A single retiree receiving a little over $2,000 a month can find average rent hovering around $1,000, which immediately leaves room for groceries, utilities, and healthcare without constant pressure. Now look at a retired couple bringing in roughly $4,000 monthly, and the picture shifts even more, because median home prices sit near $131,888, turning ownership into something realistic rather than distant. That single factor, housing, quietly resets the entire financial equation. These figures come from regional housing trends and cost of living comparisons across similar Midwestern areas, and Enid consistently lands on the more affordable side while still offering essential services. Life here moves at a steady, grounded pace that doesn't try to impress, it just works. Places like Cherokee Strip Regional Heritage Center reflect a deep local history, while open areas like Meadow Lake Park give residents space to walk, fish, or simply spend time without spending money, which becomes more valuable the longer you stay. Healthcare access runs through Integris Bass Baptist Health Center, meaning routine needs stay local instead of becoming long drives, something many retirees only fully appreciate after they need it. Here's the part most people don't expect. Enid is quiet, not temporarily calm, but consistently still. There's no constant stream of events, no built-in entertainment cycle, and that changes how daily life feels. For some retirees, that's exactly what they're looking for. For others, it can feel limiting. The local economy is stable but not expansive, shaping both opportunity and energy. And while internet and infrastructure inside town remain reliable, stepping into more rural edges can change that experience. Still, the trade-off is clear. Lower rent and manageable home prices create breathing room, whether you're living alone or as a couple, and that breathing room turns into flexibility, fewer financial compromises, and a retirement that feels sustainable instead of stretched. Number 9. Cedar Rapids, Iowa. What if you didn't have to choose between affordability and having an actual city around you? In Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that trade-off starts to disappear in a way that catches people off guard. A single retiree working with a little over $2,000 a month can find average rent sitting around $1,090, which still leaves enough room for groceries, utilities, and healthcare without constant pressure. Now stretch that to a retired couple bringing in roughly $4,000 monthly, and the equation becomes even more flexible, because median home prices hover near $202,097, which makes ownership possible without pushing the budget to its limits. That balance matters more than it sounds, because Cedar Rapids is not a small town pretending to be a city. With a population well above 100,000, it offers a level of variety that changes how daily life feels. The numbers come from housing averages and cost of living comparisons across mid-sized American cities, and Cedar Rapids consistently lands in that middle ground where expenses stay manageable without cutting off access to services. The city stretches along the Cedar River, with neighborhoods like Czech Village and the New Bow District adding a sense of identity that feels established rather than manufactured. Places like McGrath Amphitheater bring in concerts and events, while the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art and the Cedar Rapids Kernels provide year-round activity that smaller towns often lack. Healthcare access is anchored by facilities such as Unity Point Health St. Luke's Hospital and Mercy Medical Center, which means more complex care stays local instead of requiring long-distance travel. Here's the part that shifts expectations. Cedar Rapids doesn't feel like a retirement town, and that's exactly why some people are drawn to it. The energy comes from a mix of working professionals, students, and families, which can feel refreshing or slightly out of sync depending on what someone expects from this stage of life. Winters can be cold, costs are lower than major cities but not minimal, and the pace changes depending on where you live within the city. Still, the advantage is clear. You're not sacrificing access to culture, healthcare, or convenience to save money. You're simply paying less for it. That combination is harder to find than most people realize, and it becomes even more noticeable when the next town changes the pace completely. Number 8. Hattiesburg, Mississippi. What if retirement didn't actually feel like slowing down? In Hattiesburg, Mississippi, that assumption starts to fall apart because this is where affordability meets movement. Average rent sits around $1,150, while home prices hover near $213,638, which places it in that rare category where costs stay manageable without stripping away lifestyle. Those numbers come from regional housing patterns and cost of living comparisons across similar southern cities, and Hattiesburg consistently lands in a range that keeps it accessible without feeling limited. The difference shows up the moment you step into the city. This isn't a quiet retirement pocket tucked away from everything. It's a place shaped by University of Southern Mississippi, and that changes the entire rhythm. Restaurants stay active, local events rotate throughout the year, and downtown carries an energy that doesn't fade after sunset. Spots like Longleaf Trace stretch for miles, offering walking and biking paths that feel more like an escape than a routine, while local museums and small venues keep the cultural side of the city alive in a way many towns at this price point simply can't match. Healthcare access runs through systems like Forest General Hospital, which provides a level of service that keeps both everyday needs and more complex care within reach, something that becomes more important over time than most people expect. Now here's where expectations shift. Hattiesburg doesn't adjust itself to retirement, it keeps moving, and that creates a different kind of experience. The presence of students and working professionals means the pace stays active, which can feel refreshing or slightly overwhelming depending on what someone is looking for. The climate leans warm and humid, the city changes with the academic cycle, and affordability comes with a level of energy that not everyone anticipates. Still, that contrast is exactly the appeal. You're not stepping away from life, you're stepping into a place where your costs stay controlled while everything around you continues to evolve. Number 7. Florence, Alabama. What if a town didn't just give you affordability, but gave you a story to live inside? In Florence, Alabama, that story runs through music, water, and a pace that feels intentional rather than slow. Average rent sits around $1,100, while home prices hover near $200,000, $270, placing it in a range where costs stay controlled without pushing you into isolation. Those numbers come from housing comparisons and cost of living patterns across similar southern cities, and Florence consistently lands in that space where affordability meets identity. The town sits along the Tennessee River, and that alone changes how daily life feels. Mornings can start with a walk along McFarland Park. Evenings can end watching the river settle into silence, and in between, the city carries a rhythm shaped by its past. This is part of the Muscle Shoals region, where artists like Aretha Franklin and the Rolling Stones once recorded. And that legacy still shows up today through events like the W.C. Handy Music Festival, which brings music into the streets in a way that feels authentic rather than staged. Downtown Florence holds independent shops, local restaurants, and a walkable layout that makes everyday life simpler without feeling empty. Healthcare access is anchored by North Alabama Medical Center, which keeps both routine care and more serious needs within reach, adding a layer of stability that smaller towns often struggle to provide. Now here's where the trade-off becomes clear. Florence doesn't chase rapid growth, and that shapes everything from job opportunities to how quickly the town evolves. The pace is steady, the changes are gradual, and the energy leans more toward consistency than excitement. For some, that feels grounded and reliable. For others, it can feel like things move a little too slowly. The climate stays warm, the community is close-knit, and the town doesn't try to reinvent itself to attract attention. Still, that's exactly where the value sits. You're not paying for hype, you're paying for a place that already knows what it is, and that clarity creates a kind of stability that's harder to find in faster-growing areas. Number 6. Lake Charles, Louisiana. What if retirement didn't just lower your expenses, but raised your everyday experience at the same time? In Lake Charles, Louisiana, that balance starts to show up in ways that feel almost unexpected. Average rent sits around $1,100, while home prices hover near $197,799, placing it in a range where affordability still holds without stripping away lifestyle. These numbers come from regional housing patterns and cost of living comparisons across similar Gulf Coast cities, and Lake Charles consistently lands in that zone where costs stay manageable while daily life remains active. The setting itself plays a big role. The city sits along Lake Charles and near the Calcasieu River, which shapes both the landscape and the rhythm of life. Waterfront areas, open skies, and access to nature are built into the experience rather than treated as extras. Downtown carries a steady flow of activity, while places like the lakefront promenade offer space to walk, relax, and watch the water without spending anything at all. The cultural side of the city stands out in a different way. This is Louisiana, where food isn't just part of life, it defines it. Local restaurants, seasonal festivals, and one of the state's larger Mardi Gras celebrations keep the calendar full, giving the town an energy that smaller, quieter places often lack. Healthcare access runs through systems like Lake Charles Memorial Hospital and Christus Ochsner St. Patrick Hospital, which provide a level of care that keeps both routine needs and more serious treatment within reach. Now here's where the trade-off becomes impossible to ignore. Lake Charles sits in a region where weather plays a bigger role than most places on this list. Storm systems, humidity, and seasonal changes can affect both daily life and long-term planning, and that's something residents learn to factor in early. Insurance costs and maintenance can shift depending on proximity to water, and the environment demands a level of awareness that doesn't exist in inland towns. Still, the appeal remains strong. You're not just lowering your expenses, you're stepping into a place where culture, food, and community create a lifestyle that feels full rather than limited. That contrast between affordability and experience is exactly what makes this town stand out, and it becomes even more interesting when the next place takes a completely different approach to the same idea. Number 5. Tupelo, Mississippi. What if a town gave you affordability, history, and a sense of identity all at once without feeling staged? In Tupelo, Mississippi, that combination shows up in a way that feels natural rather than manufactured. Average rent sits around $1,150, while home prices hover near $197,596, placing it in that range where costs remain manageable without stripping away everyday comfort. Tupelo carries a strong sense of place, and that starts with its history. Known as the birthplace of Elvis Presley, the city leans into that legacy without letting it define everything. The Elvis Presley birthplace draws visitors, but daily life here isn't built around tourism alone. The rhythm of the town feels balanced, with local restaurants, community spaces, and a pace that stays steady without becoming stagnant. Just outside town, the Natchez Trace Parkway stretches through miles of preserved landscape, offering scenic drives, walking paths, and quiet areas that don't require constant spending to enjoy. Healthcare access runs through North Mississippi Medical Center, one of the larger facilities in the region, which keeps both routine care and more advanced treatment within reach, adding a level of stability that smaller towns often struggle to provide. Now here's where expectations need to adjust. Tupelo isn't trying to compete with larger cities, and that shapes what life feels like here. The range of amenities is solid, but not endless. The community is tight-knit, and growth happens gradually rather than quickly. Some people find that consistency reassuring, while others may notice the limits over time. Still, that balance is exactly where the value sits. You're not paying for excess, you're choosing a place where costs stay under control while quality of life remains intact. That shift becomes even more noticeable when the next town takes affordability in a completely different direction. Number 4. Hot Springs, Arkansas. What if your retirement didn't just come with scenery, but placed you directly inside it? In Hot Springs, Arkansas, that idea becomes part of everyday life in a way that feels almost unusual. Average rent sits around $1,345, while home prices hover near $240,694, which places it slightly higher than some towns on this list, but still within a range where affordability and lifestyle meet without completely pulling apart. The difference here isn't just in the numbers, it's in what surrounds them. The city is built around Hot Springs National Park, meaning access to trails, thermal springs, and protected natural space is not something you plan for, it's something you live with. Downtown flows directly into the park, with historic Bathhouse Row, small shops, and local restaurants creating a setting that feels distinct without trying to compete with larger tourist cities. Daily life can include morning walks through wooded paths, afternoons near Lake Hamilton, and evenings that settle into a slower rhythm without losing a sense of place. Healthcare access runs through systems like CHI St. Vincent Hot Springs and National Park Medical Center, which keep both routine and more advanced care within reach, offering a level of stability that matters more over time than many initially expect. Now, here's where the reality shifts. Hot Springs carries a tourism-driven energy, and that changes depending on the season. Certain times of year bring visitors, traffic, and a busier pace, while quieter months reveal a slower, more relaxed version of the city. Costs, while still reasonable compared to larger destinations, are not at the lowest end of the spectrum, and housing demand has increased as more people notice what the area offers. The environment itself shapes daily life, with warm temperatures, humidity, and a landscape that feels different from inland or northern towns. Still, that contrast is exactly what defines this place. You're not simply lowering expenses. You're stepping into a location where nature, history, and everyday living overlap in a way that feels immersive rather than occasional. Number 3. Freeport, Illinois. What if one of the most affordable towns on this list also carried a piece of American history most people completely overlook? In Freeport, Illinois, that contrast shows up in a way that feels almost unexpected. Average rent sits around $722, while home prices hover near $120,331, placing it firmly in a range where affordability is not just possible, it's consistent. That kind of pricing changes the entire financial equation because once housing drops to that level, everything else starts to feel manageable in a way higher-cost areas simply can't replicate. The town itself carries a quiet identity shaped by both industry and history. Known as Pretzel City, USA, a nickname tied to its past production, Freeport leans into its character without trying to reinvent itself for attention. It's also home to a site connected to the Lincoln-Douglas debates, where one of the most significant political discussions in American history took place, giving the town a depth that goes beyond its size. Daily life here feels grounded. Crape Park offers walking paths, open green space, and a place to spend time without constant spending, while the downtown area provides local shops and services that cover essentials without overwhelming choice. Healthcare access runs through FHN Memorial Hospital, which keeps routine and more advanced care within reach, adding a level of reliability that matters more over time than many initially expect. Now here's where the reality settles in. Freeport does not move quickly. The pace is steady, sometimes slower than what people are used to, and economic growth has been gradual rather than rapid. Certain areas show signs of aging, and while costs are low, they come with a trade-off in terms of energy and expansion. Winters can be cold, the atmosphere can feel quiet to the point of stillness, and entertainment options are limited compared to larger cities. Still, that's exactly where the value becomes clear. You're not paying for constant activity, you're paying for stability, for a place where expenses stay low and life remains predictable. That trade-off isn't for everyone, but for those who understand it, it creates a kind of financial breathing room that's becoming harder to find. Number 2. Corning, Iowa. What if the real reason people overlook affordable retirement isn't because places don't exist, but because they feel too simple to believe? In Corning, Iowa, that question becomes hard to ignore once the numbers settle in. Average rent sits around $700, while home prices hover near $140,960, placing it among the most affordable options on this entire list. That level of pricing changes everything, because when housing drops this low, the rest of the budget starts to open up in ways that feel almost unfamiliar compared to higher-cost areas. The town itself is small, with a population where a noticeable portion of residents are in retirement age, which shapes the overall atmosphere into something steady and familiar, rather than constantly shifting. Life here doesn't rush. It moves at a pace where routines matter more than schedules, and where the same streets, shops, and faces become part of daily life quickly. There's a sense of continuity that shows up in places like Central Park, where locals gather without needing a reason, and in small downtown businesses that serve as both services and social hubs. Corning is also known as the birthplace of Johnny Carson, a detail that adds a layer of identity without overwhelming the town's character. Healthcare access comes through facilities like Greater Regional Medical Center in nearby areas, which keeps essential services within reach, even if specialized care requires a short drive. Now here's where the trade-off becomes clear. Corning is not trying to offer variety or constant activity. The town is quiet, sometimes extremely quiet, and that simplicity can feel either comforting or limiting, depending on what someone expects from retirement. Shopping options are limited, entertainment is minimal, and the experience depends heavily on how much value someone places on calm versus convenience. The community is tight-knit, which can feel welcoming or at times a little too familiar. Still, that simplicity is exactly what keeps costs low and life predictable. You're not paying for options you won't use. You're living in a place where expenses stay controlled and routines remain consistent. That difference becomes even more noticeable when you see what happens in the final town on this list. Number 1. Bluefield, West Virginia. What if the number that changes your entire retirement plan isn't 400,000 or 300,000, but something much lower than most people expect? In Bluefield, West Virginia, that number sits around $107,000 for a typical home, and once you see it, everything else starts to look different. Average rent hovers near $850, which places this town in a category where affordability isn't just a feature, it's the foundation of daily life. These figures come from regional housing trends and cost of living comparisons across Appalachian areas, and Bluefield consistently lands among the lowest without completely disconnecting from essential services. The town carries a unique identity, shaped by its elevation and geography, often referred to as nature's air-conditioned city, because summer temperatures tend to stay milder than surrounding regions, which changes how comfortable daily life feels during warmer months. The setting itself leans into rolling hills, open views, and a slower pace that feels rooted rather than temporary. Places like Bluefield City Park provide walking trails, green space, and a sense of quiet that doesn't require spending to enjoy, while the presence of Bluefield State University adds a subtle layer of activity and learning opportunities that keep the town from feeling completely static. Healthcare access runs through Bluefield Regional Medical Center, offering routine care locally, while more specialized services may require travel to nearby cities, which is a consideration that becomes clearer over time. Now here's where the reality settles in. Bluefield is not a fast-growing town, and it doesn't try to present itself as one. Economic activity is modest, Younger populations often move elsewhere, and that shapes both the pace and the energy of the community. Some areas show signs of aging infrastructure, and the rhythm of life remains steady rather than evolving quickly. For some people, that feels calm and manageable. For others, it can feel like opportunity is limited. Still, the trade-off is difficult to ignore. When housing costs drop to this level, the entire structure of retirement changes. Fewer financial pressures, more flexibility, and a lifestyle that feels less dependent on constant income. That difference is what makes Bluefield stand out. Not because it's perfect, but because it shows what affordability can actually look like when it hasn't been pushed out of reach. The real math. Now this is where everything turns into numbers. A retired couple bringing in around $4,000 a month looks stable until location changes everything. In higher-cost cities, rent alone can cross $2,000, pushing total expenses past $5,000. Shift that same income to places like Enid, Oklahoma, or Freeport, Illinois, where rent stays near $1,000, and total costs can land closer to $3,000. That gap, nearly $1,000 monthly, becomes real breathing room. Now look at a single retiree working with a little over $2,000 a month. In a higher-cost area, that can fall short before covering basics. But in lower-cost towns where rent stays under or near $1,000, the same income can still cover essentials with some flexibility left. That shift shows how location alone can change whether retirement feels manageable or constantly stretched.